It was below zero. The snow was falling fast and thick. I was cosy in the cabin, lit by a roaring fire, as I sat on the couch. I've owned this cabin for a couple of months now. I got it cheap, as I hadn't had any interested buyers for some time. Although it's only 3 hours from home, this piece of land feels so isolated, which is why I bought it in the first place. It's my place to get away and relax. It was on a long patch of land surrounded by large pines. This time of year, everything is covered in snow and quite beautiful, although freezing. I looked up at the clock, which showed 11 p.m. The fire was roaring, and I could hear the cold wind howling outside in the storm. The windows rattled in the wind, making a tapping-like sound against the cabin. I was so invested in my book that I didn't even think anything could have disturbed me, until I heard it. A knock at the door. I thought, who would be knocking at the door? It's a blizzard outside and nobody lives even remotely close. I wasn't one to scare easily, but something felt so wrong that night. I stood up and I grabbed a small knife I use for letters that was sitting on my side table. I walked to the front door and shouted out, "Who's there?" No one answered. "Who's there?" I said. Still nothing. The wind blew hard against the door, almost shaking the cabin. Suddenly, someone started to bang on the door angrily. I backed up towards the wall and raised the knife. "Go away," I shouted. They continued to bang on the door. I backed up so much I had run into the wall. "Go away," I shouted again. My palms began to sweat. I was terrified. The knocking stopped. I was so shaken but relieved that they had stopped. I walked close towards the door and placed my ear up against it. All I could hear was the wind blowing through the cracks. I looked over towards the window to my left. What I saw made my heart sink. A man staring at me. His face was covered in stitches. I could barely see skin through the knots of stitches and cuts. They ran across his eyes and mouth. 2 small, angry, bloodshot eyes peered out of the small holes. He ran the knife across his face, opening up small stitches along the way. Blood ran down his cheeks towards his chin. He didn't even flinch. How could he do that, I thought. He's insane. I quickly ran away, bumping into the side table as I made my escape. I was too late. The latch on the door was swinging as the door was wide open. The snow was blowing into the house as I stared out into the darkness. I looked down and saw something near the door. A doll. Its face was stitched up like the man's face, eyes and mouth stitched close. He must have left it there. Does that mean he's in the house? My skin was crawling. This person was in the cabin with me. I ran into the living room and hid behind the couch, listening carefully. I heard footsteps walking down the hall. What are they doing, I thought. A new sound broke the silence. A motor. Why would he be starting a motor, I thought. I started to shake when I realised it was a chainsaw. He started to walk slowly up the hall, revving the saw. I could hear it getting closer. I was sweating and shaking. The blood vessels in my eyes were bursting. He revved the chainsaw. He knew I was close. I panicked. I had to act fast. I looked out into the pines and all I could see was darkness. I heard something behind me. I turned my head around and saw him standing at the front door. He bolted towards me quickly through the snow. I could barely see through the fast-moving snow. I turned and continued to run towards the car. I unlocked the door and got inside, slamming the door behind me. I turned on the car's headlights. The man stood there with the chainsaw. He ran at the car with the chainsaw held out in front. He yelled loudly, but it was muffled through his stitched-up face. I started the car and pushed down on the pedal, driving the car straight into him, knocking him a few feet away. He crashed down into the ground and rolled off to the side of the driveway. I didn't look back. I kept driving. It wasn't long until I reached safety. I pulled my car into the parking spot outside the police station. I lowered my head onto the steering wheel and started to cry. That night, authorities investigated the cabin. They searched the spot of bloody snow he landed in, but he was nowhere to be seen. What they found instead was frightening. A face peered from the ground, surrounded in snow. A dead face, covered in stitches. I learnt soon afterwards this is why the house was for sale in the first place. The last owner had gone missing, presumed to be lost on a hike. Turns out that wasn't true. He had been murdered, mutilated, face stitched up and buried in the driveway. After learning what my fate was meant to be that night, I put the property up for sale and never stayed there again. I will never forget what happened that dark and cold night.